Hello everyone. Good morning. I'm Stephen Jones. I'm the Executive Director of the School of Public Health and the Interim Assistant Vice Provost for Health. It's a pleasure to welcome you here for the first of our Food for Thought Planetary Health lecture series. Some of you were probably at our People Around the World Planetary Health Diet conference in February. Those of you who were, thank you very much for coming, and thank you very much for coming again. Those of you who weren't, welcome. I hope that you enjoyed this presentation very much. The University of Saskatchewan has, of course, set itself the goal of being the university the world needs, and that means, for me and I think many others, the university which solves real-world problems which impact people, not just in Saskatchewan, but around the world, building on the strengths of this institution and the province. And I think nobody would really argue that one of the strengths of this province is in its agricultural industry and the rich history of the University of Saskatchewan in developing, for example, new plant-based proteins. And I think it's fair to say that the Beyond Meat burger probably wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the research efforts of people within the College of Agriculture here at the University of Saskatchewan. We live in a time of incredible change. Climate change, whether you like the topic or not, is very firmly in the public sphere. I watched John Oliver on Sunday. It was an extremely funny show, but the point was very well made, that this is not a topic that we can avoid any longer. Regardless of what certain types of the media say, scientists know that human activity has changed the climate in a way which cannot be allowed to persist. I was at a public health conference the week before last, and the government climate service was there. Saskatoon specifically is anticipated to have its annual temperature increase by 6.8 degrees by the year 2100 if we don't do anything about carbon emissions. That's a 7-degree temperature rise. Imagine what that does to the climate. It also is, the rainfall patterns are going to shift so that the rainfall actually moves to the very northern part of the province rather than where we actually grow most of the food right now. So that's going to cause some significant changes. At the beginning of April, I was very fortunate to be in New Zealand at the International Union for Health Promotion and Education, and that was a planetary health focused conference. And one of the speakers pointed out that if you are in the bottom quintile so the bottom 20% of income in the UK, and you try and feed your family according to Public Health England's Healthy Eating Guide, you will spend 74% of your income on food. Hands up those people who think anybody can spend 74% of their income on food. Right. Food is a fundamental social determinant of health, and poverty as a driver for the inability to access food is a fundamental driver of health inequity, not just in this city, this province, but across the globe. This is something which, as public health and health professionals, we have to address. We have an urgent and moral obligation to do so, but we also have perfectly good science and healthcare related reasons for doing so. If we look across the globe, it is the richest countries who have the highest rates of obesity. It is also fair to say that second and third tier income countries are rapidly catching up. But if you look at the richest countries across the globe, it is the poorest people in those countries, those people who are the most insecure, who have the largest problems with obesity. And the global cost for obesity was estimated 3 years ago to be $2 trillion. To put that into perspective, smoking costs the global economy $2.1 trillion, and all armed conflict costs about 2.4, and that includes all of the costs of responding to terrorism threats and everything else, right? So these are vast global costs related to the inability of people to access and use healthy foods. That's what spurred us to develop this ongoing lecture series. The conference was a great start. We had some really good speakers, but we need that public conversation to continue. We are delighted that Dr. Hassan Vatanparast, I think that's right, not bad, who is a close colleague and friend of mine from the School of Public Health and the College of Pharmacy and Nutrition, has agreed to give the first of the public lecture series. It is a joy to see so many people on a Thursday morning before a long weekend, after term has essentially ended, in a room in a university. I hope that we can keep this following and hopefully increase it as we go forward. The purpose of this series is to challenge us to think differently about food and health, and how and what we eat and where it comes from. Some of these lectures are designed specifically to be provocative and ask us to ask questions about what we think. I firmly believe that this is the purpose of a university, to ask difficult questions, to examine the data from all angles and allow people to make up their minds, not on the basis of personal opinion, but on the basis of actual data. And I hope that you come with us on this journey. I think we're going to be doing this until February next year. Very excited that I think the next People Around the World conference will be focused on the Sustainable Development Goals. That was timed beautifully, was it not? And it's no surprise that a lot of those Sustainable Development Goals are also related to people being able to feed themselves and address the social determinants for health. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Hassan to the podium to give his presentation. I hope that it excites you as much as it does me. I think this topic is one of the things which we absolutely have to address, and I can't think of anybody better to introduce the topic to us than Hassan. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Before I start, I'd like to know who are the audience. How many of you are grad students? Okay. How many of you are academic, working at university? That's great. And then how many of you are from community? I'm very happy to see that we have audience from community as well. So thank you for Dr. Jones for walking us through the goal of this talk, and then mentioning some of the ideas that I was going to cover. So you did a great job. No, that's okay. That's okay. So the learning outcome for this talk, as you see in here, I'm going to be quickly going through globalization. And after that, there are three phenomena that are happening together. They are interconnected. I'm going to be walking you through them. And after that, I'll let you know what is happening in terms of global perspective of this globalization in terms of changing dietary patterns of the people. I will bring examples of two at-risk group of population, indigenous people and immigrants. And then after that, looking for solutions. I'm going to be talking about planetary health. For those who have background, that would be great. And perhaps at the end, if time allows, I'm going to be talking about some challenges in terms of feasibility of implementing planetary change and what needs to be considered. So with that, you're going to be seeing, because that's the global perspective, you're going to be seeing lots of maps in here. Sorry about that. But to walk you through, you see the hotter the color, the higher the prevalence of obesity, starting from adult obesity in 1975. That's the data that we have had available. And just look to see how the color changes from white to the dark, say, red. And also years. You see that we started seeing from here. This is a very rich region. These are Persian Gulf countries that they are rich in terms of having oil and resources. And then you see United States in 1992 is entering to that level of 22-25%. Moving forward, we see more countries are coming in. And Canada is joining in 2001 in that club of 20% and higher. And then it still is going up. It was in 2006 that there was a warning paper came from United States that if we don't do any intervention, it's not going to be reversible, the challenges that we will have with obesity and obesity-related diseases. But still, you see after that, it's continuing, going on, and that was the last data set that we have. From 75 to 2014, you see that the prevalence of overweight, obesity, just obesity tripled. If you look at the figures on overweight, the magnitude is huge. Here, this part is women and men in developed countries like Canada. This is a global perspective right in the middle, and men and women in developing countries. You see how trend over time has increased. So obesity really is a major problem, as Dr. Jones mentioned that. It's a very interesting it's hard to visualize it. But imagine the BMI, you are familiar with BMI, body mass index, as the major indicator for evaluating overweight, obesity, weight status. The reference values that we have is based on data that are collected around during 1980s. With the prevalence that we see nowadays, in here, if we go to set the standard values for normal weight, we're going to be having somebody like this as normal, right? Imagine how change has happened. It's hard to visualize, but how normalization is changing. Some key facts, I'm not going to go through all of them because Dr. Jones mentioned some of them, but that's a major problem. From 2009, I have seen that WHO put too much emphasis on that to do something. So even they created a term come as global obesity that shows that how important it is in terms of the burden of disease in a global perspective. You see the figures in here, around 2 billion in 2016 overweight, and 700 around obese, and then goes to children. One might think that it's just a matter of kind of age, and with adulthood usually it enters, but we see in children, 41 million children age 5 and under that, and adolescents, 340 million. So it's a major problem that is happening. Again, Dr. Jones gave you some numbers in terms of burden, economic burden of obesity. It is huge, considering other threats that we have on the planet. So some key questions. Is the trend of obesity accelerating? Is going up? If it has happened in Canada, United States, developed countries, gradually we see that there's an accelerated increase in other countries. And also, rich or poor are taking the burden. We have seen that. Unfortunately, poor are the ones that are taking the burden of the obesity, and there is a direct association between food insecurity and obesity, and then goes to chronic diseases related to that. Is there any difference between urban and rural areas in terms of prevalence of obesity? The first assumption that it should be higher in urban areas, but if you look at rural areas, I remember the first report that came from Canadian Community Health Survey, that's a national survey that we have. Saskatchewan farmers were the fattest farmers in Canada. And then if you visualize, so imagine if you have air travel, visualize you see a farm, you see lots of machineries around it, and the farmers take one machine, goes to the job, comes back, another machine. So lifestyle has changed quite a bit for farmers as well, and it's happening around the globe. And adults or children, seems that it's happening more in adults, but again, that's a warning that we see that it's happening in children as well. So obesity itself is considered, based on the new documentation from WHO, they consider a form of malnutrition because that's excess in intake of a specific type of macronutrients. They call it excess or lack of intake, can be considered malnutrition. So what obesity does to us is related to cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, certain type of cancers, and osteoporosis. So even osteoporosis, one might think that it relates to bone, how it may have association with obesity, but it has association. This figure came out a few days ago. That's the prevalence of chronic diseases in Canada. 44% of Canadian adults, age 20 and over, they have one of the 10 chronic diseases. The ones that I cycled in here for you, these ones are the ones that are directly related to what we eat and obesity. Okay. Now, this is a background to motivate you to follow me throughout this talk. So what's the challenge in here? Now, what are the major underlying forces? Why this is happening? Then globalization comes. this is not a new term. You are familiar with that, so I'm not going to be going through the definition of it. But what is important is that it has been around. Remember Marco Polo travels from China going to Europe. So there has been this kind of human being connection in terms of trade and those kind of things. But what has happened is that we had innovation in technology in a way that in a matter of seconds, anywhere in whatever part of the world, wherever part of the world that you are, you can be influenced by media, by product. You can purchase everything, almost everything, through online services like Amazon, Alibaba, and so on. It's not new, but the pace of it has increased significantly, and that put us at risk. On the other side, one of the factors that is related to globalization is urbanization. I like to focus on this part. This is 1950. This is urbanization at that time, and then proportion of different part of the world. You see in here East Asia, South Asia. These are the parts that urbanization is happening very quickly in them. Again, moving from resources, kind of agriculture and nature, and then living in urban lifestyle. And this is the projection by 2050. Remember that 2050, because we're going to be going back when we are talking about planetary health. There are lots of data. I'm going to be avoiding going to too details of it. So there is an index of globalization, as you see in here. In x-axis, in here, horizontal axis, you see the index goes from 0 to 100. And then here is daily energy intake. As globalization increases, daily energy intake increases. So it has impact on what we eat, and then consequently, obesity and related diseases. Okay, so overall, I guess you now have an imagination what is happening. We have food available everywhere. For those who are living in Saskatchewan, going back to 20 years, the diversity of the food that you see in market is very much different. I remember I came here in 2002. There were many ethnic foods that were not available. Now everything is almost available. I remember my parents were asking me if they should send, say, Persian-style food, kind of food items. And at that time, yes. But now, to convince them, I am taking pictures from grocery stores in here that you see the same tea that you have, we have it in here. So everything is really available and comes to globalization. So what is happening, how it has impact on us, the consequence is that, yes, when food is available, quantity, type, cost, and desirability of food is changing. And then the final result would mean appropriate data intake and lower physical activity. And then you see a higher prevalence of nutrition-related non-communicable diseases. Usually I like to use pictures in my talk, reflects what is happening in different parts of the world. This is, I have seen that in Guatemala, in many countries during my travel, that it's a traditional kind of market for food. This is the way that we see these days. Also in here, the type of a snack, the type of gathering for food, from making the food to the time that you are serving that, everything has changed. And franchises like Coca-Cola, they have rooted almost everywhere. You cannot imagine areas like, I have a picture of that I will show you, like close to Amazon and indigenous communities, Coca-Cola is there. It has rooted even in the culture. In Mexico, there is a group of UK researchers in Mexico. They had a very nice video of, there is a salsa dance and those local dances that you are very much familiar with. And there is a Coca-Cola dance that they are dancing using their own, say, traditional dance, but Coca-Cola plays a role. They have a plate that marked Coca-Cola and they are handing in Coca-Cola and so on. It's amazing to see how they are using a cultural platform to promote themselves there. And I guess around maybe 15 years ago when United States attacked Iraq at that time, the first thing that was happened, availability of Coca-Cola in the schools in Iraq. 2-3 years after, statistics showed that the consumption of Coca-Cola in Iraq is 3 times higher than global average, opening the market for their own goods and so on. Again, the type of market that I enjoy to go, and then what is happening right now. No human interaction, just go grab and then scan it and then come. just another visualization of what is happening, moving from healthy foods. And you see the culture of, in childhood, that usually our taste is developed based on what we eat during our childhood. And then if we introduce this from childhood, whatever we see is considered a different taste, and you may not like it. I remember that we had an article in it's Effect of Vegetables on Bone, and in gossip column of New York Times, there was a note from one of the columnists saying that why God created all healthy foods bad in terms of taste. So like broccoli is good, it has high calcium. Why we should have, why healthy food are not tasty? That was the question that was asking. And it's not just about nutrition, going to physical activity. Traditional type of food, moving toward video games and so on. We have seen that in newcomer children coming from their home country, so having kind of outdoor activities now, for different reasons, they have to stick inside the house, and then video game is the best way. There are different reasons for that we are hearing from newcomer families why they are very much into video games and so on. Now, with this information, I guess we can, all you agree with me that there is a transition happening in the way that we eat. And the term that can be used is nutrition transition. But before going through it, I need to share with you two other type of transitions that are happening, because these two are really interrelated with what is happening in terms of nutrition transition. Some of you may have been familiar with that. Demographic transition. The definition is that the patterns of moving from high fertility and high mortality to one of low fertility and low mortality. This is what is happening. Different stages, pre-industrial, transitional, industrial, and post-industrial. And say, if we put it in this, I have a purpose of putting this figure in here. So moving from high fertility mortality rate to reduced mortality, changing in age structure, and then focus on family planning and infectious diseases control in human history, and then this is the results. We have chronic diseases dominance, and now the focus is on healthy aging in many countries, mostly in developed countries. The other term is epidemiologic transition. When I entered as a physician to the field, actually I started working as an epidemiologist, my first impression was that, okay, I'm going to be dealing with lots of infectious diseases. So one of my duties was trying to monitor what is happening in terms of prevalence of mortality, morbidity of the different diseases. And then I noticed that, oh my God, so what is happening, that's in Iran. We see much more mortality, morbidity from diabetes, cardiovascular diseases than infectious diseases. And at that time, this term, I got to know that term at that time. So prevalence of infectious, increase in prevalence of infectious disease, shifting increase from increased prevalence of infectious diseases with malnutrition and famine, and then toward high prevalence of chronic diseases. Again, there are 4 stages defined for pestilence, and then stage 2, receding pandemics, and then degenerative and man-made diseases, and stage 4, age of delayed degenerative diseases. In some epidemiology textbooks, you see that they call this a stage back to nature. And there have been movements in real term that people have gone, colonized in the nature and try to live with the nature. So stages of epidemiology transition, high prevalence of infectious diseases, and then we had famine and poor environmental conditions, focusing on family planning, infectious diseases, and famine alleviation. Again, we have chronic disease predominance and focus on healthy aging. You see the same thing is happening, 2 phenomena together in human history. And another way of describing that, over time in human history, we had famine in here, and then at the time that human being was able to find means to control infectious diseases, the pattern changed, and chronic diseases became dominant. Now going to nutrition transition. Barry Popkin from North Carolina University was the first person. He was an economist, not a nutritionist, who brought this term. Based on his own observations, something is happening. Major psychological changes in nutritional profile of human beings, dietary intake and energy expenditure are changing. And then it's related to interplay between economic and demographic, environmental, and cultural changes. This is what we call it globalization, right? So nutrition transition, the impact of globalization and transitioning in the way that we eat and act. Later on, he tried to simplify the definition. The shift in the way that we eat and move and subsequent effect on body composition in the human history. And then again in 2011, 2012, he made it more specific on major shifts. So shift toward sugar-sweetened beverages and increase in proportion of food and ultra-processed food. That is really our major problems that we have. Stages in nutrition transition: high prevalence of undernutrition, receding famine, focus on famine alleviation, and nutrition-related non-communicable diseases. And now we are focusing on any kind of intervention to improving our nutritional health. And now having all three together, you see the end outcome is similar in here because of the interventions that we have in human history, throughout human history, and now the focus is on healthy aging and any kind of intervention that changed the behavior. Having all of them in one picture, this is the way that these three transitions are interacting. Hope it wasn't boring or complex to you. Now, how nutritional patterns have changed over time. So yes, human beings were hunter-gatherer, and then after that they had settlement, and then there were kind of monoculture. During monoculture period that famine emerged. After that we had industrialization, receding famine, and then nutrition-related non-communicable disease behavioral change. What is happening, remember these patterns in here, 3 to 5. From this to 3 to 5, what happened due to globalization, urbanization, economic growth, and then technology changes and so on, this happened very quickly. And in some communities, it happened very, very fast. The term that is used is accelerated nutrition transition that happened. I really like this quote in here from this gentleman, 1966. I'll let you read. So many generations we were really hunter-gatherer, and then depending on agriculture, and then industrial revolution, and then only 2 generations grew up with processed food. So he says that the problem is that perhaps our genes don't know that. They program today us as the way that they were programmed before. So that's one way of saying that. The other problem that we have in our kind of academic life is that we really try to find somebody to blame. The easiest way, if I don't have a healthy lifestyle is, and I am obese, I like to blame on my genes. And the tendency of moving to that direction is very high. And then it really, we are not taking responsibility over our action. So the historical, what I told you that there are some specific groups of population that this nutrition transition is happening very quick. It's not a matter of 1,000 years. It happened even less than 100 years. One group that we are very much familiar with is indigenous people in different parts of the world. So the picture that we had from indigenous people, this is the way that we could visualize. Hunter-gatherers, very active, very healthy. And then nowadays, you have seen better than, you know perhaps better than I, what is happening in indigenous people in off-reserve and on-reserve. You see that they are experiencing accelerated nutrition transition because you are moving away from their own traditional food and way of life. And this is happening very quick. You have seen the reports on obesity, overweight, and the challenges that they have on campus. I have some pictures that I can show you, but before that, some figures. So this is non-indigenous people in Canada. In terms of overweight, self-reported overweight, you see that really not that much difference between Inuit people less than the other group of population, indigenous people. When it goes to obesity, around 18%, 40%. This is huge. And then goes to other groups of indigenous people, is still very much higher than non-indigenous people. So there are different ways of explaining why this is happening. And going to self-reported, you know that diabetes is one of the major problems that indigenous people have. There are some rural communities in North Manitoba that at age 13 they have type 2 diabetes. This is a major problem. So 17% First Nations and 10% in here. I went there for a talk, a workshop. Basically, we set up the room like this, and then these are teachers of teachers, the people that you see in this picture. And then on the side, I put those kind of metrics to measure your body mass and then waist circumference, and then go see how much you are at risk of cardiovascular disease and so on. And I was impressed with the level of knowledge that they have. They all did that. They were talking about the stories that their kids, their relatives, that they have diabetes and so on. And then I had a break. And then they went out and came in. Coke and chips. It was a surprise. I told them, come on, we just talked about this, and you showed me that you have very much knowledge about healthy versus unhealthy eating and so on. And they said, go check our grocery store, the only grocery store that we have in the community. And this is the only thing that you can find there. And that was true. And then talking to the owners, well, we cannot bring perishable food, it's very expensive in here, people don't buy it, and so on. Anyways, that's another challenge, that we need to consider the environment as well, the availability and accessibility of healthy food. There are movements, but you see the change in dietary habits is big enough that we cannot visualize moving away from it. I have an example in here. So today I decided to bring my water bottle to set the example that we shouldn't be using plastic water bottles, and then I forgot to bring it. I put water in it. I forgot to bring it, but I had to have water because I was not feeling good. Anyways, so kind of visualizing the life without that is very hard. The way that they do practice, they are setting very good examples. Everybody who's coming, we need to plant a tree. Say, I planted the tree with the chief, with this gentleman. So that's a memory of being belonging to the nature. We need to go back to the nature. Guatemala, the same story. When you go to the people, you are amazed to see how good they are in terms of way of thinking. In Guatemala, they have the highest prevalence of malnutrition and food insecurity in Americas. But people are very progressive. They have very good sense of community. They like to do their best to take care of the challenges that they have. And then the challenges start with the change, historical change in the way that they are cultivating things and eating patterns and those kind of things. So basically, if you go everywhere in Guatemala, you see coffee farms, and then their product goes out. And then say, again, that group in UK, I remember they had a study, they noticed that the way that they are making their tortillas is protecting them from nutrient inadequacy for many nutrients, but now is taken out, the tradition is taken out in many communities, and then the packed foods, the bread, comes to them that doesn't have that nutrition value. They were very progressive in a way that they were telling us that teach us how to fish rather than giving us something. There are many people from different parts of the globe that they like to help us, but we don't need that kind of help. We like to take over of our responsibility of our life ourselves. Let us know how to do that. They have local market. You can find everything in there. Yeah, okay, I pass quickly. Yeah, say this is the type of food that you can find them. And then, but I have pictures of the person who's selling during the break time comes, have a big bottle of Coke and cookies for his own lunch. And this is a traditional market that they have. We have some champions, like these two ladies that are champion for a traditional Mayan way of life, traditional medicine and so on. We have a group of women that they like to empower women in the country. They are planting in the form of co-op or any other form. They are planting the products that they have that are traditional to themselves, and they are selling them, looking for a market for them. And also in new generations, we have some entrepreneurs that they come to Canada, United States, they learn business, go back and make successful co-op for the agriculture products that they have. So there are very good movements are happening in those countries. But at the same time, we have Coca-Cola influence there. We have McDonald's there. Historical factors that impacting health and identity of indigenous people. This is based on their own research. Loss of that indigenous identity. Here in Canada, I see that sense of pride that I am indigenous in many people, but not all. But in countries like Guatemala, I haven't seen that. People that are indigenous, or in some parts of Brazil, people who are indigenous, they don't feel that they can easily say that I am indigenous. They do not have the privilege of, or the sense of proudness that I am indigenous. You can ask questions if you have why this is happening. Experience with residential schools, and then goes to influence of religion and culture, loss of parenting skills, goes to violence, and then traditional teaching. And then the last one, which is important, is moving away from their traditional way of eating, hunting, fishing, and so on. Then what's happening in other groups of people those who are coming to Canada? Immigration has always been in Canada, but what is changing is that most newcomers to Canada, around 32% of Canadian population by 2030, are going to be people from different cultural backgrounds. So in a way, they have similarities with Indigenous people because they are coming from different cultures. And that makes challenging here. We had a very comprehensive study in Saskatchewan looking into their nutritional health in children and also parents in terms of barriers that they have related to health. So usually immigrants to Canada are healthy at the beginning, at point of entry, but over time they are losing that healthiness very quickly. Within a matter of 2 years, you see that the self-reported health, say moving from good health to poor health, declines by 3 times, and then goes to chronic disease and so on, that they are coming very quick. What to blame? Nutrition transition mediated by dietary acculturation. This is something as one of the major factors that have impact on their health. Again, moving away from what they used to eat to something that is to their culture is fancy. Remember the picture that I had in Guatemala? McDonald's. Usually in most countries, say franchises like Guatemala, like McDonald's or KFC and so on, they are very luxury and expensive. So back home, if it was once a while, if my parents can make it to me to go to McDonald's, right now it's very cheap available. So it's very easy for children to move to that direction. And for parents, back home, if one of the parents was working right now, both of them are working because they can't afford the cost of life. And then that's easy, cheap, convenient to buy prepared food going home. What acculturation does to health status of newcomers. Imagine the picture that I had, or the slide that I had on Indigenous people, the similarities in here. Becoming obese, increasing blood cholesterol, and then heart disease, go down to depressive symptoms, and then the dietary changes that is happening to them. There is a model that explains what is happening for Indigenous people, for newcomer children. Imagine they say that, okay, if you are in your home country, based on your socio-economic status and cultural factors, you have a specific way of life that defines what to eat, what not. And then when you come to a new country, you get exposed to the new culture, and then the changes are going to be happening to you, and then you are adopting new dietary pattern. In reality, imagine if you bring that the scope of globalization and nutrition transition, this is really not the whole story, because nowadays you don't have to be in Canada to adopt the Canadian culture, right? Or the Western type of diet and lifestyle. Everything is available in your home country. You saw McDonald's everywhere that I have gone throughout my research life. I have seen those kind of franchises and so on. They are growing very fast. And so you can get exposure to them in your original culture. Depends on where you are at in terms of the stage of nutrition transition in your country. If it has happened or happening or accelerated, then you're going to be already at risk. And in our study, we found that because the prevalence of inadequate intake, you see, if you consider milk an alternative and fruit and vegetable as index of kind of indicator of healthy food intake, this is prevalence of those who are not meeting the requirement based on the old food guide. It's very high. Going to food insecurity, you see one side unhealthy eating, the other side is food insecurity, not having access to healthy food. If you look at the national survey data for immigrant population, they say 15% of them they have. And then for general population, it's 12%. In comes to immigrants and refugees, in our study, 62% and 43%. This is huge. why we have this discrepancy? Because in national survey data, if you cannot speak English or French, they're going to be excluding you from the study because they don't have resources to have interpreters. So they are excluding those who cannot adapt with the new culture and being a different country. And those are the ones who are much more at risk because they can't make money. And then for refugees, Syrian refugees, recent Syrian refugees, the situation is much worse. And overweight, obesity in children, at the time that in Saskatoon or in Saskatchewan, the prevalence of overweight and obesity in Canadian children was 28%. In newcomer children was 22%. So it means that something has happened to them. So they have been exposed to Western culture before, right? So the nutrition transition has happened. Qualitative data is helping us to see, yes, that is happening. Overall, what we found in newcomer children, they are at risk of food insecurity, nutrient inadequacy, and at the same time, high prevalence of overweight. We see both sides of malnutrition. And then, the situation might be much worse in Syrian refugees. We talked about the challenges. What are the enabling factors for kind of maintaining traditional dietary lifestyle and dietary habits for both indigenous and newcomers from different culture, people of culture, let's call it. Promoting sense of identity. They shouldn't be ashamed if I am not in, say, from dominant culture in here. Traditional healthy behavior, promoting that, and learning cooking skills. Most indigenous families, they do not have that skill set, taste preference, and then health, then knowledge about the health, the way that we are defining health, and availability of traditional foods. Okay, so I'd like to wrap up what I talked about nutrition transition, because so far I guess you got a sense what is happening in terms of the magnitude of problem related to health issues. In developed countries, what has happened in terms of nutrition transition has happened within 2 generations. So there has been enough time for the system in developed countries like Canada, United States, Europe, to adopt their system to deal with the challenges like related to chronic diseases, dominance, and so on. We see portion size increase, we see away from home food, snacking, and so on. And then it's a beautiful picture that Mushtaba, my PhD student, put in here. Say 1950, these are the sizes. And this is the size today. And then the system is in a way that encouraged you to go to higher portion sizes and so on. If it was original size, now these are the sizes. So it's cheaper if you go with bigger size, and then you see the consequences. There have been lots of videos, documentaries, and so on how this fast food and so on are dealing with you. And eating out, again, this is a culture that actually Saskatoon, I guess, per capita has the highest number of restaurants in Canada, as far as I know. It's a very interesting culture. 22% of Canadian population in CCHS 2015 data, this is the most recent results that we have, they are eating out. So it's easier to go out. That has become a culture. And then when you eat out, then you can imagine what are the choices. Evolution of human experience with the food. Imagine if 300,000 years BC, we had cooking skills came up. You see how it has changed over time. And I like to focus on here. So this is post-war, 1950 to 2013, where data was available. So moving toward kind of ultra-processing food. If you can imagine what you eat at home, most of the foods that we have, in many cases, are if it's not processed or ultra-processed, are semi-processed, because we don't have to start cooking from scratch, right? We don't have time to do that, and it's a bit hard. Other part of the globe, when we go to developing countries, again, major shift. What we call it is happening in developing countries, accelerated nutrition transition, as I said before. It's from 55 years ago, Dubai, and this is Dubai now. And there is something like a competition for celebrities to buy villas, or say in this called they call it Burj Khalifa, or say that's the biggest building in the world. So there is a race in a way to buy an apartment there, and then wherever you go, you see the footprint of say franchises like McDonald's and so on. Even in countries like Iran, that McDonald's does not allow to practice, we have Persian version of it. The product is really exactly the same because they come here, they learn, and then they open their own franchises. They learn what to do that, how to do that. So in developing countries, see this part of the world, the kind of orange part of the world, the diet is shifting very rapidly, and then traditional foods, people are moving away from their traditional food to very high, to kind of high salt, sugar, oil, and saturated fat. These are the items that right now we need to, well, based on most recent recommendations, we have to limit. And the result is obesity and obesity-related diseases. Urbanization, I mentioned that before, Dr. Jones mentioned that. This is the projection by 2025. In developing countries, moving from around 2 to around 4. Most population growth is happening in urban areas. So another reason that why we have dominance. Also, globalization of mass media is happening. You cannot imagine how easy is using cell phone in many developing countries. In Canada, Canada has the most expensive cell phone service. And when you go, say, to many development, I didn't know. When I was working with Syrian refugees, I was told by researchers in the field that the best way to communicate them is social media, because that's very easily available and accessible for them. And it's very cheap. So, and you see that advertisements are influencing people in any way possible. I'm going to be quickly going through these figures, availability of energy. Just look at the item in here. And then here, this is the highest and the lowest, and what is happening. This is the energy in 2013, countries, the distribution in countries. And then going to carbohydrate, you see how high it is in some countries, and Canada is almost in the middle. And then going to protein, you see that Canada, United States, Australia, so most developed countries is very high in there. And then going to saturated fat, which right now there's a question about it, again is high in most developed countries. And now going to use of consumption of the foods, these are, say, fruit can be considered as an indicator of healthy food. How low it is in most part of the globe, both in developing countries. Only a few countries you see that they have high intake of food. Vegetable, the same. Actually, for vegetable, it's very interesting that in most developing countries, they have high intake of vegetables. Again, by vegetables, we shouldn't be mixing up with some kind of starch-based vegetables like potatoes and so on. I don't know the details of this data on vegetable. Going to nuts and seeds. Again, you see that recommendations right now, they is more on including nuts and seeds in your diet. How poor it is in many parts of the globe. And Canada actually is in a good position. It's 15 to 19.9 or 20 grams per day. Whole grain, that's a major problem right now. You have seen many papers about whole grain and refined grain. In my lab, we have two of my students, one postdoc are working on it. Whole grain consumption is not really that much high. In Canada, around 15% of Canadian population, they have somehow balanced intake of whole grain and refined grain. Most part of the globe, they do not have whole grain. Seafood intake, again, is very low in many countries, high in some specific countries, which geographically makes sense, right? So they are surrounded by the ocean and the sea. Unprocessed red meat, these are the countries that they have high intake. This is unprocessed, but when it comes to processed red meat, you see Canada, Latin America, Central America, and European countries are the ones that have the highest. Now, this is a very recent report, came I guess around a month ago, the first paper in kind that looked at how diet kills you or disables you. That's a very interesting paper that came up that's a series of burden of diseases through Lancet. This is mortality rate per 100,000 population attributed to diet. And here is the number per 100,000. And you see that you have Russia, and then you have Middle Asian countries, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and so on. And this is Polynesian countries, and it's very high in them. Now, the numbers, 11 million deaths and 255 million, this is disability adjusted life years. These are indicators that are used in burden of diseases. This is huge, and to me, as a person who is working in the field, first time seeing that somebody is picking on a specific nutrients and food groups, that was amazing. They looked into 15 food groups, and I don't like to go through this side. It's confusing because it looks at two different countries in terms of their socioeconomic status. Just focus on this side. This is per say 3,000 times 1,000 is going to be 3 million people. Diet high in sodium. Anyways, diet high in sodium is killing 3 million people. Diet low in whole grain, almost the same number. Low in fruit, around 2 million. This study was amazing in kind of showing how specific elements in the diet can cause problem in terms of health. There are much more detailed data. Those who are interested, I would recommend going through the paper itself. In Canada also, we have a report in 2016 that brings dietary risk as this is risk for in terms of percent death, that you see that dietary risk comes first with tobacco goes together. Now, so far I guess you have some idea of what is happening in terms of nutrition transition around the globe in developed and developing countries. What's the projections for 2030? For 2030, developing countries are the ones that are taking the burden. Dr. Jones mentioned that it unfortunately is happening more in poor countries. And there are different reasons for that. What I like to emphasize is radical changes in food marketing in those countries, and also double burden of disease, and having both sides of the story. One side we have undernutrition stunting, the other side we have obesity. And imagine what happened in terms of nutrition transition in countries like Canada. It happened in 2 generations. System had enough time to deal with it. And then when it comes to countries like, say, some of the African countries or Middle East countries, they have both infectious diseases comes related to malnutrition in childhood and chronic diseases. So in terms of the nature of these type of diseases, infectious diseases are urgent, right? So it's going to be killing you if you don't do anything. So then do they have the resources to deal with double burden of the diseases? Definitely they do not have. And that's why what is happening then is very quick and the burden is very high. So I talked about that, and then again, that kind of vicious cycle that is happening. When you are a child, you are malnourished, you are prone for infection, you have problem with growth and development, mental, physical health issues. When you are entering to adulthood, you enter to obesity related. So it's a vicious cycle that is happening in those countries. Some facts, this came very recently, the 2 forms of malnutrition are biggest cause of health loss globally. This is a report by WHO. 7 billion population, imagine. 2 billion, they have, say, macronutrient malnutrition. 800 billion suffer from calorie deficiency. Comes to this side, other side of the story, overweight and obesity, 2 billion. And 1 in 12, diabetes. You see, that's a double burden. So I'm going to focus on this one. 58 countries out of 129 countries within that study, they had both together. So imagine you are in your healthcare system, you are a policymaker or service provider, you like to do something. How you can use your resources to deal with those kind of situations. So to summarize in this part, I'd like to move to planetary health. I wish we had time to have kind of interaction, but I was told that we need to keep the questions at the end. Food is the single strongest lever for optimizing human health and environmental sustainability based on the data that are available now. And then, we see the other side of the story. We see that food is killing people one side. The other side, we see that it's destroying our environment. The food production, the way that we are practicing right now. So there should be something to be done. Now I'd like to have a short video for you.
This is the story of how one species changed a planet. The latest chapter of our story begins in England 250 years ago. Fueled by coal, then oil, several brilliant inventions appeared. They ignited the Industrial Revolution, which spread like wildfire through Europe, North America, Japan, then elsewhere. The great railways, then cars and highways, connected people across the globe. Medical discoveries saved millions of lives. New artificial fertilizers meant we could feed more people. Population rose rapidly. But this was nothing compared with what was to come. The 1950s marked the beginning of the Great Acceleration. Globalization, marketing, tourism, and huge investments helped fuel enormous growth. People swarmed to cities, which became even more powerful engines of creativity. In a single lifetime, the well-being of millions has improved beyond measure. Health, wealth, security, longevity, never have so many had so much. Yet 1 billion are malnourished. In a single lifetime, we have grown into a phenomenal global force. We move more sediment and rock annually than all natural processes, such as erosion and rivers. We manage 3/4 of all land outside the ice sheets. Greenhouse gas levels this high have not been seen for over 1 million years. Temperatures are increasing. We have made a hole in the ozone layer. We are losing biodiversity. Many of the world's deltas are sinking due to damming, mining, and other causes. Sea level is rising. Ocean acidification is a real threat. We are altering Earth's natural cycles. We have entered the Anthropocene, a new geological epoch dominated by humanity. This relentless pressure on our planet risks unprecedented destabilization. But our creativity, energy, and industry offer hope. We have shaped our past. We are shaping our present. We can shape our future. You and I are part of this story. We are the first generation to realize this new responsibility. As the population grows to 9 billion, we must find a safe operating space for humanity, for the sake of future generations. Welcome to the Anthropocene.
So if we, as a human being that had that much influence, as we saw in the video, on the nature, we have the responsibility to do something with that. One side, we have our own diet to be healthy. The other side, have positive influence on our environment. So that's really in say public health system. As a person who has been in public health system for around 20 years, it's the traditional approach was focusing on the health of human beings. Right now, we need to look at broader. We need to see what is happening, what we have done, and how we can manage to change the situation if there is any way to do that. So that's why this planetary health diet came in. This happened around say 2 months ago, 3 months ago, that the Lancet report came in. Which was commissioned a while ago. To give you an idea, Mushtaba and I, my student and I, we tried to put together some timelines, what has happened in terms of evolution of planetary health idea. But definitely it's not we might be missing some of the milestones in here. 1973, there was a paper, should trees have a standing law, mortality and the environment? Christopher Stone, by that paper, created a huge kind of movement in a way that people became sensitive on what is happening in environment. So having, say entertainment facilities within the nature, in jungles, and then killing the environment and so on. So that was the first one that I found directly relevant to planetary health. And after that, 1980, all of you, I believe that you are familiar with the classic definition of health that came in 1980, that is not just the absence of disease. It looks at the bigger picture of human health, considering, say, the well-being based on, overall mental, physical, and social well-being of a human. At that time, there was an environmental group, Friend of Earth, that they tried to influence WHO to include this statement in it, but they were not successful. Personal health includes planetary health. That was the first time that I saw in literature that term, the specific term was used. And then you see the milestone here. This is another influential paper came in. The patient Earth is sick. That created a good movement in a global perspective. And then the idea of planetary health in 2019 came in. There was a Rockefeller Foundation Centennial Conference in Beijing. And then after that, 2014, say from public to planetary health. This is the report that came by Lancet. And again, kind of moving away from the traditional way of thinking about public health. And then 2015, working on the paper, collecting evidence, what we can do, started. And then now 2019, we have the Lancet report ready. For those who have not seen that, I would really encourage you to go through it and see. I hope that some of you had a chance to go through it. So what does it say? So to visualize it, imagine that this is our planet Earth. This is the safe zone that we have, the orange part of it. And these are 4 scenarios. Say A, B, C, D. So starting with scenario A, and imagine that the best situation is that if we be within this cycle, the safe cycle. Scenario A, if we focus only on health and then forget about what we have done in terms of damage to the system, then that's going to be a win and lose. Win in one side, the other side is going to be lose. Scenario B, if we focus on sustainability and then forget about the healthy dietary pattern, we're going to be losing the momentum on that. So it's going to be lose-win. And then lose-lose, almost what we are doing right now in terms of dietary practices, health status, and the damage that we are creating on the planet. And this is going to be the win-win situation if we kind of expand our focus on human health and consider planet as well. So they came up with some targets. Target 1, healthy diet, and target 2, sustainable food production. I'm going to be going through only the parts that are relevant to my expertise. Definitely, one unique thing about planetary health is that it does not belong to any specific discipline. This is transdisciplinary approach. It doesn't belong to academia. Everybody should be involved in that. So, and that's why I'm very much happy to see people from community are in here. So healthy diet should be in place to optimize our health. And you know the definition of health, the classic definition of health. And then overall, what it says, the message is that cutting on plant-based food, on animal-based food, red meat and so on, and doubling the amount of food that you are getting from plant-based. And then these are the messages that we have already heard from Food Guide Canada. It was very interesting that both came almost in similar time, and then we saw how these two are very much similar. Say, you see, this is the plate. Half of it is vegetable, and when it goes to our other groups, food groups, you see that whole grain is in here, and they are kind of promoting the healthy eating. Not that you need to cut beef, you can have it, but the proportion shouldn't be that much as the way that it is now. I can show you what's the proportion now. And then when I am looking at this, just I'm pretty sure that you have seen this as well. So our Food Guide Canada plate, you see how similar they are. There have been 2 different processes for that. They had their own independent research. I guess 18 researchers across the globe, they worked on this. And Health Canada worked on their own. And it was interesting to see. That's something like a cross-checking. Interesting to see how they came to a similar conclusion in terms of what you should put in your plate. And I know that Health Canada was in criticism a lot now for bringing this bold idea of this and going to what kind of, you have seen in news, we like to make Canadians vegetarian by promoting that. There are lots of criticism. There has been lobbying and so on to other kind of food industries and so on, trying to kind of bring the idea that no, we need to have more proportion of animal-based foods within the Food Guide. I'm going to be passing this, but what is missing in Food Guide Canada is quantification of what type of food. You see the big picture, you see the encouragement, and what are the things that you need to, and what are the things that you need to limit. But here, the planetary health comes really with quantification from what food products, how much. I'm not going to go through this. You will see the slide later on if you like that. And comes up with practical examples of different type of plates that you can have. Another criticism that comes to planetary health is that you're going to be making all human beings eating the same thing. What about local cuisines? One of the motivation for trip, for tourism, right? But really the story is not like that. That's too extreme. And in target 1, the change should be happening by 2050. That's the only time that we have to reverse the situation that we have right now. So again, more than doubling the consumption of healthy food, and then 50% reduction on sugar-based barriers and sugar-based and unhealthy foods that you saw in the list. So this is very interesting. Actually, the first attraction that I had in global in that planetary health was this one. This is at global perspective. You see, these are foods that we need to limit, optional foods that we can have, and emphasize food that we need to really eat more. In a global perspective, you see how high it is, the consumption of beef products. And then here, again, goes to starchy vegetables. It's really very high. Going to different regions of the world, sub-Saharan countries, you see how low they are in these items in here, but how high they are. And these are children that they have malnutrition. And remember the vicious cycle that I discussed. North America, I guess it was easy to say that or imagine that, yes, beef and egg and chicken, and then goes to a starchy vegetable that is very high. So imagine that if we can balance that how good it could be. South Asia, again, the starchy vegetables and so on. So they came up, these are what you see in this scenario. These are 3 scenarios, 3 ways of calculating in global burden of disease. There are 3 ways of calculating the risk, as you see in here. Going with each of them, we have the estimation of how many years or how many people, how many lives we can save per year. Close to 11 million people are saved if we go to planetary health diet, according to their estimations. Again, if you'd like to know more about how they come up with the level of evidence, there is a detailed report on that. Just search Planetary Health Lancet Commission report, and then you will see lots of detailed information about that. Then they are talking about target 2, which is sustainable food system. I am hoping that one of the future talks in this series is going to be on sustainable food system, is outside my expertise. But the challenge is that we need to really move very quick because we don't have that much time. Otherwise, everything is not going to be reversible. Again, the focus on that part is on 6 key systems that you see listed in here. Again, because it's not my expertise, with the hope that in future we will have a talk on this, I leave it for the future. Then comes to the actions for each of the areas. Again, these 2 are relevant to me. Shifting dietary, moving towards kind of healthy eating pattern. And also waste. We need to decrease the waste that we have. Just, I don't know how much you are familiar with the literature on food waste. Just visualize every restaurant that you go, every night that you go to a restaurant, what is happening in the back door, in those trash bins. Lots of foods are there and so on. There have been lots of reports how much. I guess there is I don't remember specific numbers, but huge amount of food is wasted, mainly in developed countries. So we have even sustainable development goals on that has detailed kind of goals set up for decreasing the waste. And here is the scenario. Again, if we go the way that we go right now, you see this red boundaries in here around. This is the situation 2050 in terms of, say, biodiversity loss, and then nutrition and phosphorus application, and then water use and so on. The red line is what is going to be happening in future. Remember that orange line was the safety kind of border that we had. And if we go with the scenario with the scenarios that comes with planetary health, we really keep everything, we can keep everything within that limit, safe limits. So they come up with 5 strategies. The 3 to 5 strategies are outside my experience, but seeking international national commitment to shift toward healthy diet, this is huge. I mean, looking at from policy perspective, having that commitment in the government and then the influence on food industry and so on, this is going to be a huge challenge, how you can make it going up to 2050, considering that that's our deadline. And reorient agriculture priorities so that we can diversify the food, not going to specific food items as you saw how big they are, their proportion in terms of our plate. And again, moving to the direction of increasing consumption of plant-based food is a huge change in terms of diversifying the agriculture and so on. And you have seen again, our new food guide is emphasizing that. In terms of feasibility, this is the question that we have, how we can make those food available, accessible, and affordable for the people. Michelle, my PhD student is in here. She's from Guatemala, and then she's very much familiar with kind of calculation on food basket and so on. She did a quick evaluation of if we go with planetary health plate in Guatemala, is it doable or not? Do we have people that they can afford it? That's the challenge. No. It's going to be very hard to people. It's going to be very expensive for them. Dr. Jones gave you some figure. In different parts of the globe, we have from 70% when we have when we like to have half of our plate from vegetables. In developed countries, it's around 17% of the daily income can go on that. And then in some countries, it goes to around 70% of income. It's really challenging. And then again, I mentioned the element of culture. If we go with that plate, what's going to be happening with the culture? How we can make it culturally relevant? This might be a complex graph, but I'd like to mention just this part. Again, you see the different scenarios. This is business as usual with full waste in diet. What's going to be happening? Too hot. And then this is planetary health with full waste. We do nothing on managing the waste. This is halving the waste and then having dietary planetary health diet. You see the impact on industry. We can see it easy, oh, let's do that, right? But if you look at it from a bigger picture, it's billions of dollars lost in different parts of industry. And that's why the first criticism that came was from the industry, food industry side. What's going to be happening to us? They are worried about what's going to be happening if it's promoted. So one of the challenges that we as academics have when we are communicating with them is how to communicate them in terms of the shift in the way that they are doing agriculture or involvement in food industry so that they can move along with the goals of planetary health. I'm going to be moving from this slide is on reorienting agriculture. Just like to emphasize, we shouldn't be just focusing on calorie intake. We need to again diversify the food that is available. Now, perhaps most of you by now, you have this question, okay, is this another way of playing with words? We had global health, we had One Health, we had eco health. This is another thing coming out, planetary health. What's the difference? So planetary health shares the same vision on focusing on health equity, which is the main focus in global health. One Health, the connection between human environment and animal, again sharing the same vision in planetary health. Eco health, again sustainable human system sharing the same vision. But what is different in planetary health is the focus on the timelines. Perhaps in a way, the way that I can kind of interpret that is bringing the ideas to action, considering that we really have a deadline. We have a deadline of 2050. Otherwise, we cannot reverse the situation that we are in right now. So definitely, like any new movement, we have some challenges in the area of planetary health. So one, imagination challenges. You see just simple decision making that I shouldn't be using bottled water. How I can make it a regular practice myself. Going to a resort, again, going to bigger decision, ethical decision, going to a resort for my holiday, I know what is happening in resorts, or giving that to the poor. That's a major ethical question that we need to make. Creating that culture in the people is really important. Realignment of human evolution history, and also, again, so far, our biomedical perspective, that the way that we live, it gives us the authority to feel that we are masters of the nature. But moving that, we are not masters, we are protectors of the nature. And then moving toward that kind of indigenous way of life, if you look at world views of people from around the globe, from traditional beliefs and practices, you see that harmony with the nature rather than kind of mastery over the nature, this is the way that they see. Perhaps we have to go back to those basic principles. And then again, we need to be open to all, and then not feeling that if I am academics because I understand perhaps better, I don't know if I do, then it belongs to me. It's open to everyone. The culture should be created to all people. Then it comes to knowledge challenges. There are many unknowns in the field that we need to figure out. So how to deal with the challenges? When we are talking about biosphere, thinking about the health of biosphere, not just the way that they are feeding us, again, that bigger picture. Comes to thinking about economic growth and development, bringing that indigenous understanding of the values of, say, air, land, and sea. In most indigenous communities, I am amazed whenever I go and talk to indigenous in different part of the world, how they see the earth and the planet and the life and purpose of life is very different from the way that we are practicing nowadays. Moving forward, other challenges comes to implementation. So active engagement of the community group. We should go to the community. This is not something, again, a new paper, Lancet paper with impact of X published, yay, this is a new idea, go get grants from us as academics. This is a responsibility for all of us. If we think that it's based on evidence, we need to engage all people in it. And we need to have some kind of precautionary principles up to the point that we identify the risk for deviation in the future. And then we need to come up with sound policy decision and locally sensitive action. So again, it's not just having one recipe for all. The idea is a planetary health, but the action should be locally defined and get aligned with that. So definitely, like any new idea, you see there are criticism. So like the inconvenience truths behind the planetary health, talking about that the scientific consensus claims are misleading. So there is a bias in here based on unsettled science. And then the danger of white hat bias, because it comes from academics, we need to trust. And also the notion that, oh, come on, you are forgetting the culture. Food is not just for eating. There are other things that are involved in it. How we can make it. So there are, just search in the media, there are many claims. And then in a way that they are getting WHO involved and positioning of the WHO, I didn't put, there are many quotes that I had, say from industry, you're going to be killing beef industry when it comes to Canada, United States, and so on. So how are we going to be dealing with that? But again, just like any new idea, this has been in the evolution of the science. Right now, a good example, if we have the President of the United States and the issue of climate change, and then he doesn't believe in that, and then that kind of territorial approach in a way that why I should say move down in terms of kind of follow the Paris Agreement goals while say China is not doing that. Why should I be behind in terms of economic growth because I should have that mandate other countries shouldn't have. So there are those kind of thinking, moving from our own benefits to a global level and think about our planet, that's something that we need to do. So just to conclude, so nutrition transition and consequently nutrition-related non-communicable diseases are really killing and disabling many people around. The burden is much more than many other or all other kind of risks that we have. Suboptimal diet is responsible for this, again, any other risk globally, and then improving diet could potentially prevent 1 in 5 deaths in a global perspective. There is an urgent need for a holistic approach in a way that we need to consider those elements of sustainable global shift toward healthy intake and large education reduction in food loss and waste and improvement in food production practices. And then it seems that planetary health can give us that opportunity based on what we know from that so far, that it can help us to have a sustainable food system. It really considered the both major agreement sustainable development goals that we have, at the same time the climate change goals. And definitely the next steps for that would be re-examining the evidence, making sure that we are in the right direction, and then moving toward action, not just internationally, because we cannot again have that one recipe for all, locally and nationally, moving toward better policies to the direction. And I'd like to acknowledge the people, I presented some data from our studies, and then definitely I can't bring all the names in here, but I can mention Mushtaba, my PhD student at the back, who helped me with putting together this slide. Co-investigators that have been working with me, funding agencies, NGOs, and special thanks wherever that I have gone. If it wasn't because of the people and their willingness to work with me, definitely we didn't have that much production. And thank you for your attention.
What are some things that we can do? There's certainly some learnings that we can take from our indigenous populations, from our global populations that have joined our community. What are some things could you offer, Dr. Hassan, that we can individually do so that we feel like we have some power, or some choice, or some control over our own destinies?
So if I understood the question correctly, is that kind of putting aside my academic hat and starting to remember I had a slide on challenges, a kind of visualization, imagining how I can practice that planetary health in my life. It comes to a daily change that I'm going to be making in my practices. I gave you that simple example of water bottle goes to any kind of waste that we can have, going to habits of eating out and those kind of things. I think that if we kind of, the first thing that I'm going to be doing actually is, I had thoughts on this, that I'm going to be listing my daily activities, kind of have a routine of myself, and then try to link with the targets that I have in planetary health and see, okay, what are the things that I should change when it comes to food preparation, when it comes to eating out, when it comes to take my car, come to university. Again, that's the green gas emission and so on. So these are things that we need to think very seriously about, and depends on how, as people are engaged into it, we can actually create that culture. And then when people are sensitive to this kind of matters, then it can go up. And again, that's we have to, in health promotion, we have to approach this. The main approach, grassroots approaches, can influence policymakers to bring to their agenda to move forward with that. Again, that was my thought as a person, not as an academic, that I have made, as soon as I heard about that planetary health, I decided to go into details of what I'm doing. But there's still a long way to go. Yes?
Yes, and thank you very much, Dr. Hassan, for a great presentation. I'm sure you agree that the nutrition problem and obesity is a multiple factorial issue. Mm-hmm. One of the issues I think is not drawn attention is the mental health issue, because mental status of person affects eating habit as well as air pollution. Air pollution basically can affect, as a basic, can say that biochemist, the activation of lipogenic transcription factors, mm-hmm. which will end up having more lipid and obesity. Indeed, we tested in C. elegans more than 10 years ago, and we saw that the C. elegans, when we put under compromised oxygen condition, are being chubbier, and it changed the dimensions of the body of that animal. And I think these factors also should be included onto those health maps to give better understanding of the situation.
Okay.
I want to ask your comments about that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so I couldn't agree more. As a neuropharmacologist, you consider those kind of factors that come in. That's true. And I just covered the parts that are related to my expertise. Climate change is one of the major areas in planetary health that they are dealing with that. And whatever you said is true. It should be considered in that. And then the mental health issues, there is a two-way direction with mental health and physical health when it comes to nutrition as a factor. So Mahasi, my PhD student, is working on food insecurity in refugees, and then we see that the sense of insecurity, overall insecurity, how it has impact on the way that they are eating. And then the challenge that really creates some problem in terms of, say, food insecurity. Biologically, it causes problem. Again, there are hormonic pathways and so on that has impact and creates obesity related to that. And then when it comes to mental health, again, that sense of insecurity in general and food insecurity causes much more trouble. So definitely there is a bi-directional connection in the two and should be considered. Again, I had a note in here that it does not belong to a specific field. I am just covering the part that is related to me, but hopefully throughout this series we have experts from different fields coming and opening up to other fields as well. They have platforms that can be used by government. Why not? Governments can create platform, more kind of healthier platform for other initiatives. That's one note that I had yesterday. And then the other note for those who are criticizing that culture is missed in here. If you go to Planetary Health, we're going to be having a universal plate. But no, because it clearly says in documentation that this is what we think that should be, and go locally, customize it for your own. And I was talking to Kara this morning that I see that in future we can have a community group in here trying to practice planetary health, customizing the food, using the flavors and whatever you have to have that localized to Saskatoon. So this is the direction, not just like Coca-Cola. For Coca-Cola, we can have that kind of criticism that everywhere in the world Coca-Cola is Coca-Cola. There is no change. But planetary health can be different from a place to another place. Yes?
I like your comment about what we could do in the community to sort of get ourselves together for action groups, so be food health activists, not just social activists.
Exactly.
But my thought that was coming to my mind when you were considering about what we can actually do as individuals. So I'm going to make a plug for the university that's given me an option to do something. So next week, I'm going to attend the session that's about roof gardens. And I think that persons who, for their economic situation, have to have housing in larger buildings, apartments, where the housing costs are kept to their means, then it would be nice if they could have garden on their roof of that apartment building. So the technology and the will and arrangements have to be thought of. So I'm going to find out what those are, because Saskatoon was expanded out onto good farmland. So we paved concrete over perfectly good farmland. And so the city wants us to become more concentrated. So they want our buildings to go up on a given smaller space of land so that we can keep more arable land available. So those are my pitches. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. You see, these are novel ideas that needs to be considered. Again, customizing that approach depends on the situation that you are. If I am living in Saskatoon, what can I do? What are the best options and resources that I have in here? And I would really encourage the organizers, Kara, I think that the sooner we can have a social media platform that we can collect ideas like this, having pictures, having ideas shared, and even why not put in context and then, who's going to be coming up with best idea on what, how we can move to this direction. And creating that culture in the people, approaching the media, local radio stations and so on, having them on board and creating that culture with them, just not ourselves. Thank you very much for the comment.
I'm wondering if you could speak on the role of healthcare professionals and the impact of globalization has had on human health and immigration.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alicia. That's a really important question. It needs lots of reflection. I think that in future I see that we will have something like a focus group in allied healthcare professionals and reflecting on that, the challenges that we have and the opportunity that comes with planetary health. I guess we can talk hours on that, but we have different settings. So you are a dietitian, you're going to be working in community health services, or you're going to be working in hospital. If it comes to the hospital, the story is going to be totally different. One of the movement coming back to novel ideas that I saw in one of the indigenous communities in the north, I forgot the name of that community. There is a hospital, but they don't have high, rate of, patients hospitalized. So what they decided to do, they went to the community and then they are working with the people making food for them and delivering for them. So there are different ways, or kind of moving toward kind of more sustainable way when it comes to the way that food is served in hospital and so on. Again, these are just prompt thinking and brainstorming on that. When it's come to community service, creating that culture, I guess from now on, Alicia, I see myself, I'm promoting that. And definitely I would say that you will do that as well.
Any other questions? Well, you meet me halfway even. Thank you.
I will.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for your talk. I had to step out for a little bit of it, so maybe my question was covered well while I was out of the room. But I've done some research on this over the last year and changed my own personal eating habits quite dramatically over the last year for a lot of benefit, so I'll just add that. But could you comment on the bias for the status quo by food processors with profit as their motivator versus our health, and also the healthcare system and their links to the pharmacy industry and treating symptoms rather than root causes? In other words, adding drugs to the equation rather than removing other possible things from the equation.
Oh, thank you very much. That's a very tough question to answer. Again, it comes to the challenges that I mentioned, because whatever you said, it really involves the element of policy. You see, the movement that has been started since 2015 in Canada. In 2015, Health Canada decided to go to all provinces, talk to the people, see how their food guide is used, how it's used in the practice. And then they realized that there is no use of it. And then they moved to the direction that, okay, no, we need to change our approach. Come on, it doesn't work. So then they started going to those systematic reviews and collecting information and coming up with the idea that, okay, something for the people, not for researchers, not for a specific group of community, not for food industry. So they are moving very fast. And one of the things that Health Canada these days is proud of is that they believe that they provided the opportunity to food guide. I'm using Health Canada because that's a close to home example. We can understand that better. And their planetary health, their plate is very much similar to planetary health similar. So they were under criticism that so far for the previous guide, you were very much under influence of industry. And I was a witness in Ottawa last year, a few days before the release of the kind of principles of the new food guide, that food industry, say their industry, they were lobbying the politicians and every, say, possible person in the politics that they can influence. Because you see that in food guide, if you remember in the plate that we have in Canada, we do not have very much kind of presence of dairy. So from personal perspective, perhaps that's not a good idea. But they try to be open and only move based on evidence. So to summarize, I gave you an example. To summarize that's the main challenge that we're going to be having. So then the approach to create that culture should be really a two-directional approach. So we need to start, say, grassroots movements. We need to create that culture, have buy-ins in politicians, let them put them in their election agenda that I'm going to be working on this, rather than say, kind of being passed and just looking forward to see what's going to be happening at top level. Health Canada has the information, they can influence the policy. No, it has happened before that in a different case that Health Canada, we were talking about a specific matter, and they said that can you please bring it in your paper so that we can show that for the to decision maker rather than coming from Health Canada. So we can work as a community to influence each other and the politicians. Again, the environment is not good in a global perspective right now. Right now, you see that territorial approach, the fight, the tariff fight that we have. Yesterday, NAFTA, again, Mexico, Canada, United States. There are China tariffs. In last 3 days, you have seen major changes. And we don't see a good horizons. I guess the first thing that we have is a good buy-in in the people, a good global movement in the people. And then on the other side, the politicians, they need to really get in alignment with the need of the people. I guess that's very kind of comes very simplistic approach, but we need to move to that direction. Yes.
I think we'll take one last question.
In an ideal world, we managed to reverse the militarization.
Yeah,
Those budgets are converted to reinventing an urban design that eliminates the need for car transport to go to Costco on the weekends and get your food and bring it home, that dragging back and forth. We're basically on a military joyride where the car is loved more than people and the planet. I don't know if we get there. If we don't get there, at what point do we start having extinction protocols? How to plan a post-human world where we at least are polite enough to turn off the lights on our way out, where we shut down the nuclear warheads, we shut down the nuclear plants, and we shut down and deactivate the oil and the chemical industries. So at least all the planet killers that are in play right now don't carry on after we're gone. Do you see any reference models for urban redevelopment where there's a centralized urban population that doesn't travel by car in all directions all the time, where the food production is centralized? Is there a
Yeah, that's a very good point. I am not urban planner myself, and I see in some point we will have people in the same event coming talking about that perspective. But that's a very important comment. I have seen in Brazil, one of my own observation, that in one of the rural communities, they took us to a location, a kind of a school system that it was basically a student's kind of residential school, in a way that from rural communities, kids are going there. They, within 2-week period, they have hands-on learning. It's not just theoretical materials. And then after 2 weeks, they go to the field for 1 week and practice what they learned. And then they come, and the preceptor goes see what they have done in the field, and then they come back. And then that school was independent. Nothing should come from outside. You see, the food production, whatever that they need in that part, should be made by themselves. And to me, it was one of the most amazing things that I have seen, how they teach the kids from the beginning, or these are actually grade 5 and over, to move to that direction. And so I have seen those movements. I have heard about communities of scientists that are living in Brazil, that they decided to go live in nature. There are movements in Oregon, kind of moving away from the way of that we are making buildings right now, moving to natural way of building. And actually one of my friends is going there for 2 weeks training on that. So there are movements, individual movements on that, but holistically, I don't know.
Well, and here on campus, they're going in that direction. They're trying to set up the models. I think the local cafeteria where the head chef James is attempting an interesting model that could be propagated to.
Mm-hmm.
That might be a centralized economy of scale we'll have to get to. And the best example in Saskatchewan, I think, is some of the Hutterite colonies that have a working model, perhaps, to propagate.
Okay, thank you very much. And then more work for the organizers to kind of make a platform ready so that we can have those examples added and then kind of putting pieces together. Thank you very much.